Today's podcast is going to be a bit different. I've had multiple conversations with my buddy Daniel, an artist that I met in LA. And his love for Yeshua and my love for Yeshua and our mutual love for the truth has embarked us both on a journey of discovering the truth about the history of our faith. What is the backstory to this faith that we call our own? And how does that look in terms of how we apply that in the year 2020, particularly today, being that it's Yom Teruah on a specific calendar. I'll explain more about that in a bit, but he asks amazing questions. So I said, Daniel, I want to do some interviews with you. I want to hear you ask me some questions and vice versa. So let's talk. Now, we've had multiple conversations over multiple days about these topics, and I'm actually going to be doing something a bit unconventional. I'm going to be releasing part 3 first. Today's discussion is about the calendar issue, which calendar we follow, why we follow that calendar, and a little bit, or a lot of bit, of the backstory of how we've arrived at the conclusions that we have and how we proceed when having this new information. I hope you enjoy it. Here goes.
How you doing? My name is artist Daniel Quinones, and this is Emilibism TV, and I'm here with
Chris Crutchfield. What's going on, everyone?
Chris Crutchfield. Now, we're coming at y'all again and again because, one, Chris is just awesome, and two, there's so many tying narratives in what we've been talking about that we can't just do one, interview and then have it be done because there's like 10 other things tied into that.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, we talked about the CERN thing, the Apocrypha, those were tied in. And now what we want to do is talk about the calendar, especially with right now being September, and there's so many important dates right now, to talk about really what's going on, not only in our calendar, but in the Jewish calendar and the Holy Calendar, however you want to word it. But Chris, what do you think is, or how about you just explain to the audience what's this calendar about? What is it and what's important? Do we follow the Christmas calendar? Do we follow Santa Claus? Do we not follow December? Do we go to September? Do we follow the 17th? Do we follow the horn? Do we follow the Christmas tree? What's going on?
Great question. So I'll answer your question like this. I'll tell you my experience, what we've learned as a family, me as a man, my wife as a woman, and we kind of learned it before the baby showed up, but the baby as a baby. Yeah. But I always tell people, take what I'm saying in prayer. Take it to the Holy Spirit, research it, chew on it. I've developed the muscle to learn a thing and understand a thing before I decide whether I agree or disagree with a thing. So it's kind of like, all right, I get this concept, and then I later build upon it. So it was in 2015 that I was sent a YouTube series from my father. He'll send me links from time to time, and I usually get to them, but I'm very busy and I have a tremendous amount of unread messages in my inbox. So when I finally did get to this YouTube series, I remember watching it, and it kind of, the way I explained it is, if truth is the bigger picture, the documentary YouTube series gave me the border to the bigger picture in a jigsaw puzzle. So if you're familiar with jigsaw puzzles, you begin with the edge pieces, and then you flesh out the details of the image in the middle. The documentary was the perfect border to the bigger picture. And what the bigger picture, it was a few things that the documentary clarified. Number one, that there was a thing happening behind the scenes. I was living and working in Los Angeles 5-6 years by this point, and I had seen some stuff with my own eyes, right? Yep. That I couldn't really explain at the time. Nothing like paranormal necessarily, but just some irregular behavior. And I filed it away in the back, hard drive archives of my mind until 5 years later, or 3 years later, I come to learn some things, and I'm like, was that what I was seeing back then? This is crazy. This is all true. And so I had personal convictions and experiences that helped me know that there is a dark side at work in this world, particularly in Los Angeles. And that spurred me going, okay, well, I need to know more about this, and I need to know what the truth looks like amongst this kind of dis and side information. And so
this is 5 years after the fact, right?
this is in 2015, 2016, somewhere in that time frame. I got the documentary in January 2015, but I had been working with famous people for 4 or 5, 3, 4 years by that point.
Yeah.
And some experiences that I had in 2011 and some other ones in 2012 just made, like, it was just anomalies with doing music videos, being on set with certain, we'll say A-listers. I'm not trying to name drop, but, at the same time as doing post-production for some. I just saw things that I couldn't really explain that kind of were head scratchers at the time that I later was able to connect to being a part of this. I hate using the word conspiracy, but just this bigger picture of the Illuminati or the cabal or the hidden hand, or, however people like to codify the activity behind the scenes. Yeah. And that's where we began our journey. It was just kind of, I remember being a part of a church in Los Angeles at the time. I had felt in my spirit that the Father was saying, your time in this institution I'm bringing to a close so that I can begin a new chapter in your life. And I remember kind of being torn because I was not interested in looking for another church. I was happy there. I had no beef whatsoever with the pastor or the leadership or any, hierarchy in the church establishment. But I just felt like this kind of like raft floating away from the shoreline, if you will. It was like a spiritual thing. My father had told me of the similar thing happening to him with our childhood church that we grew up in. We spent 15 years there, and then seemingly overnight, for me, we just left and went to a different place. But he was saying that the Holy Spirit had been talking to him for multiple years about moving, and he kind of didn't answer the calling right away. And then when he did, and then they introduced the concept to us. It was kind of from a Thursday night to a Friday night. We would, like, oh, snap. Like, okay, I guess. Like, what about my friends? But for him, it was 3 years in the making. So 10 years later, when that happened to me, 15 years later, actually, it was kind of like, is this what it was like to feel like this calm assurance about a thing that you mentally don't even necessarily agree with?
Yeah, and to wrap this up, was this feeling that your dad got a shift in what we're talking about with the calendar and the somewhat institution that's been framed of us to go to church Sunday, to do Thursday, maybe Friday, and right. Then, so was his conviction and yours conviction like, wait a minute, what I've been brought up is not correct as far as calendar? What
yes, in a nutshell.
Fall on what?
It was the beginnings of that, because it was the first step in going, the familiar jacket you've had on for 30 years, you should take this jacket off so I can put a new jacket on you. So it was less about specific to the calendar at the time and more about this institutional model that you've been presented with as a 501c3 nonprofit organizational structure. I've got issues with. So I'm going to lovingly remove you from that and keep you in good relation and rapport with those individuals that are still there. But I'm going to start a new thing for you. And I feel like in a nutshell, my dad was figuring out, and same for me 15 years later. So it was kind of like he had already explained that to me when I was 25 about the experience that happened when I was 15. And so as I'm 30, pretty much at the tail end of 2014, I just remember being like, whoa, this is what my dad was feeling. So that prompted us to start, we took some time. And I just remember I would go on Sunday mornings and I go, okay, instead of going to church, I'm just going to go to the park and take my Bible and just kind of read, leave my phone at home, and just try to take the 2 hours or whatever that would otherwise be handling slides and playing with the children and dealing with song lyrics and, just serving, so to speak. And I'm going to just focus that on Yah, because I don't feel like I really do that any other time of the week so poignantly. Like Bible studies here and there, prayer time, quiet time, but not so purposeful, if you will. And then a few months, maybe a couple of weeks actually into that, he just really started putting on my heart about the Sabbath. And so these appointed times, these things like keeping the Sabbath, keeping these feasts that people refer to as Jewish feasts, but really are God's feasts, Yahweh's feasts. This is when this whole concept started being introduced to me. I was like, oh, I thought this was a Jewish thing. I didn't think that. I thought Christianity was different, and that was like kind of a Old Testament way of looking at things. And, I don't have any problem with the Old Testament, but I was just a bit confused. And so as I began to research, what I found was that a great effort has been put forth to trip up the children of Israel. And I want to make sure to tell people not to get so focused. Like, let's take everything we know about Israel and the children of Israel and put it in a chest over here on the side. Just sit that off to the side for a second. I became obsessed with learning about the beginning. I want to know, what is the origin of who was Jesus? Who was Yeshua? What is church? Where does this word come from? Why are there so many people that can tell you there's a massive discrepancy with what the Christian religion preaches versus the way that the Christian people come off? There's a dichotomy as wide as the Grand Canyon in the opinions of most people. Now, we've all met wonderful, loving, true, honest, God-fearing Christians, and we've all met the hypocrites too. So I just became really concerned with being able to answer for myself on Judgment Day when Father says, all right, put your cards on the table and here's your, let's tally everything up. I knew I would have no excuses. Oh, well, I grew up here and this is what my pastor said. So I decided, okay, I'm smart. I figured out music. I figured out basketball. I figured out Hollywood. I figured out, relocation. There's all these things as an adult now that I've been able to accomplish. Who's to say that I can't really figure out what's going on with the faiths and the religions? And as I began to research, what I found is that Lucifer, Satan, the devil, has been at it for a long time, trying to obfuscate and trip up and, prosecute and do all kinds of, goal hampering measures. Like, if this is my goal, he's put obstacles there, here, there, back then, now, and in the future. And that will continue until he is bound, like prophecy says, in the abyss, where he's no longer able to do that. But until then, it's kind of my exercise, my journey, my plight to search that out and to identify what the truth is, and then hold myself and my family responsible to adhering to that. So the whole calendar issue began with an obsession, just almost like an itch to go, I want to know like the real truth. And I'm pretty sure it's pretty obscure, and I'm pretty sure that like nobody's really heard of this. And it's kind of off in the weeds and way out in the rough and like kind of way over there underneath the bridge and like tucked away. Is not this mainstream, widely accepted thing. As I would come to learn, that's not specific to any one subculture. Every single culture, religion, and subculture has had their different variation of deception placed on them specifically so that they would embrace a life of disobedience to the Father's instructions. And that goes for the Jewish culture and religion, the Christian culture and religion, the Islamic culture and religion. So I am not singling any one person out. This is not anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, anti-Christian, anything like that. I've met wonderful Muslims in countries that are Muslim-run countries. Wonderful experience. I've had marvelous experiences with Christians in a Christian nation. I've had amazing experiences with Jewish people. I've been to Israel, been to Palestine. I've been places, fortunately, throughout the world, and my experiences with the individuals have always been pretty awesome. The leadership of these respective institutions is where I find the problems. But the
Yeah,
people,
we when you bring that up, we talked about in the last episode is that every basically everything has been contaminated. Every system from school, medical, church, work, stock exchange, everything has been perverted and slightly turned, like we talked about. A sleight of hand has happened. And with that being said, in the calendar thing, do you feel that that's kind of been one of those cases? Just slightly go this way. And you talked about it, that he slightly, and it took a decade or two to finally get the shift that he wanted, but he's in the long run.
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad you keep bringing me back to that, because all that backstory was to set up the calendar as it relates to right now in 2020. I'm a bit expository from time to time, but at the same time, I really like embracing and understanding the back so that the present makes the most sense, so that I can kind of speak with the understanding that the people who are hearing me understand where I'm coming from and why I think this way. This is not a theory. I didn't wake up and go, you know what, I feel like we should just do it on a different day. We searched this stuff out, right? And it's only been the last 2 years we've been following this new calendar. So, in a nutshell, Israel, established by God through Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel, as a promise being outworked through Jacob's grandfather, Abraham. The third son, Levi, and the fourth son, Judah, are two of the really significant sons in the 12 of all 12 of the tribes of Judah. Yeshua is unique because he comes as an extension somewhat of both. If you remember, the Genesis account attributes the priestly blessing, we'll say, to Levi. Levi was, of the 12 sons, all of them got land. Levi was the only one that didn't get land, because Levi's portion was to be closer with Yah so that he can be the ministers for all of his brothers. And his children would be the priests and the high priests for all of the rest of the tribes of Israel. And in exchange, a tithe would be given to Levi, meaning food. Since you don't got no land, Levi, we're going to hook you up with squash, broccoli, cucumbers, carrots, some cabbage. Y'all got strawberries. Issachar got the fruit. Zebulun, he's got all the grains and nuts. Judah, he's over here doing his thing. You know, it was like a family thing, and they all looked out for their brother Levi, eventually Uncle Levi, once all of them began to have children. So when you hear of a tithe, that's where this concept began. A life force, food-based sustenance for the minister of the truth of righteousness of Yahweh. As time goes down and the northern house splits and scatters, the northern house being all of the 12 sons and their descendants with the exception of Judah and Benjamin.
The 12 sons of Abraham, right?
12 sons of Jacob.
Jacob. And Jacob's father was who?
Isaac.
And Isaac's father was who?
Abraham.
And Abraham's father was who?
Terah.
Okay. And how far up do you go to Noah?
Like maybe 8 or 10 more.
Okay, so you're talking about, were they still living 1,000 years, or was it 200 years?
It was closer to 200, yeah. Shem was still alive when Abraham was alive, but he was toward the old, Shem being one of Noah's sons. He was toward the end of his days. So
yeah, because after Noah, it was cut down to 200 years.
Yeah, like 125 or something like that, yeah.
Before it was 1,000?
Exactly. It started to kind of like taper off. So couple of them lived 300-400 years, and then eventually it got up to 120 or so, and that was pretty much the expiration date.
So Abraham with his 12, you're talking like, go ahead.
Jacob with his 12 sons.
Jacob with his 12. You're talking about how many years from Noah?
We're talking probably, and this is a rough assumption without the little book that'll explain it. Let's see. Noah is 1056 AD and Abraham is 1948, BC. So 900 years or so. Noah was 535 when the flood happened. Shem lived to be 600 years. Arphaxad, his son, 438. Selah, Eber, Peleg, Reu, Sarah. So it's Noah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. Terah was the 10th generation after Noah. Abraham was the 11th.
Okay, the reason why I want to bring this up is because you're talking about 1,000 years almost of, remember, back to the fallen 200 watchers.
Yeah.
And the Nephilim, which didn't go to heaven or hell. You're talking about 1,000 years of born children that their spirits didn't go to heaven or hell, which just went into men.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is where all of your folklores and all of your Pegasuses and your your sirens and your mermaids and these like tales of half human, half other. This is the time period where a lot of that stuff was born.
Sasquatch and Yeti and wolf people.
Yep, all that stuff. Yeah, the wolf man and the whole, like all of it. Yes, because it was different combinations of intermixing between humans and non-humans. And great memory. That's quite important, because as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. So understanding that helps you frame what's happening now.
Yeah.
All this debauchery goes on since Noah's time, reintroducing all the problems of what was happening before the flood. And now we're in Abraham's land where literally nobody's even heard of Yahweh. So in Ur, the land of Ur, Kasdim, Kasdim, Abraham exists. He's like, why do we worship the sun and the moon? Why don't we just worship the person who created the sun and the moon? Brilliant logic there, Abraham. His father, Terah, is like, I hear you, Abraham. I don't know nothing about all that stuff. You sound like your great granddad Noah. He's dead. But go talk to Shem, his son, our ancestor, your forefather, and he'll set you straight with all that Yahweh talk. So Abraham, and you read about a lot of that in the book of Jasher. This is why it's upside down.
Yeah, I want to pause on that, because 1,000 years have passed with the indoctrination of the fallen angels to think to praise the moon rather than the creator of the moon. Exactly. So I want you to kind of explain how important it was for him to even think about that, because you're talking about generations of people that didn't even question it. Back to not questioning authority, just putting on the mask. Oh, let me just do this and do that and not question anything. You got one person who said, wait a minute, I'm going to question all this and find out who actually created it.
And one person, which is what I find so fascinating. It's like, just
what was it that caused him to ask that?
He basically, if I remember the way Joshua explains it, he just grew up and had a knack for, there was a specific event, I forget what it was, that kind of got him to thinking these mighty ones aren't as mighty, the mighty ones being the way that this translation translates the Hebrew concept of false gods, idols, like figurines. And keeping in mind, for anybody who might be new to this, let's say this is a zoom camera lens, right? Let's say this was my mighty one, my false god. I'm not actually worshiping the lens, plastic glass composite itself. This is a caricature of the fallen angel that this represents, who appears occasionally and actually does do things like pull lightning out the sky or make water go up here. So my mortality, especially with 1,000 years of not actually paying attention to Yah, makes me like, yo, this is crazy. This must be God. Like, wow, he can like make water splash. The true God is like, if you only knew. But this fallen angel's having a good time, being like, I am God. Spitting all over the place.
Dude, this brings up so many questions, because in this time frame is where the birth of Pegasus, the lightning god, and all of these names have appeared. And we can get into even modern time with Wonder Woman, Superman, which is just really an extension of that 1,000-year confusion of really just saying, wait, don't focus on the creator, focus on everything else.
The creation.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, people are apt for saying, well, you can see God in everything, the trees, the wind. That's true. I don't disagree with that statement. But like, if I create my daughter and you create your two daughters, and you can see Daniel in Poetic and Ethica, but you shouldn't confuse Poetic and Ethica for Daniel. See what I'm saying? There's like a rightly dividing that has to happen. And I think that all the Luciferian options that were given is all about all or none. It's like, you believe this ideology completely, or you have a Cobb salad of every ideology, but you don't actually go look for the truth. Nobody do that, because we need to keep y'all stuck like we've been stuck since 1948 BC or whatever.
Dude, that exactly explains what you talked about, the division of the sciences. Because initially you said science was to prove God, and you explained that the enemy was like, no, let's divide these. Y'all are atheists and try to discover this, but it's not real. Even if demons come out, we don't believe in that. Right. And y'all Christians are like crazy. Right. So this is basically a reoccurrence of that same methodology happening over and over again.
100%. The culture vulture is a vulture. He isn't creative, and because of his purpose and how much time he spent away from the true creator, he's lost whatever ability he had to create. So he just poaches, edits, copies, clip grabs, and then wonder shares, and then re-uploads, and don't attribute the credit. You know, he's just constantly taking other creative ideas and calling them his own, whether that's through artists in Hollywood or through legislation or whatever.
Which then sums it all back up to the importance of the calendar, because now by this time we have no idea what's Sunday and what's Saturday.
Well, you have no idea of the reason for the establishment of an order, because the new world order, quote unquote, has set up shop. Maybe they called it that at the time, maybe they didn't, but has essentially reestablished the world order. That's what the whole premise of the new world order is. People hear those three terms and we see it as this like title, the new world order. But if you separate the three words, there was an order to the world that was from the beginning. And the premise to saying, that's old, we need to create a new one, is a middle finger to the very creator that set that first order in motion to begin with.
Because the middle finger you just talked about originally happened in the fall of Satan, and then the Watcher 200 that basically had relations with the humans and then told Enoch to go up, and God said the order's out of order, which the Watcher 200 basically said, we're going to do what we want, middle finger. Oh, wait, we're sorry. We didn't mean to. And God was like, order's out of order. No deal here.
Right, exactly. And then when they fell, the order changed, and it caused what Noah experienced in the flood. It got so bad that Noah had to essentially be rescued and re-established. The Nintendo cartridge of Earth had to be taken and blown out and reinserted, and hit the reset button and slapped on top of the thing so that the glitch stops happening.
And that was Noah, but now we're kind of seeing it again.
The same thing. Yeah, same thing. Yeah. Just cycles of the exact same thing. That's what this 77-part documentary series that I first watched, it's called the Know Your Enemy series by the Fuel Project. That's what it set up. It was like, oh, so Satan's just used cycles of the same trick basically since the beginning. Got it. All right, I'm going to go research. And that's what kind of did it for me. I was like, oh, makes perfect sense now. I mean, I'm sure the Holy Spirit was ministering to me, and there was a lot of reading and research. But yes, so it happened just prior to Noah's time, causing the flood. It then is the Book of Jubilees, this one here. Yovalim, a jubilee, is a cycle of 50 years. So this book overlaps Genesis, same general story, and Jasher, but it talks about, it gives you time period. So 6 months passed between this event and this event. And then Adam was in the garden for a few months by himself. And then he was put to sleep and a rib was made. So there's like it just gives you a chronology to it. So when we read, it's like, man should have a companion and shouldn't be alone. In Genesis, because of the edit, it just seems like God finished mankind, and then he was like, okay, and now a woman, because man shouldn't be alone. And there was a period of time where Adam was just Adam. And he was like, yo, this is boring, man. Like, I wish I had some honeys to talk to or somebody. God was like, you know what? Honey is cool. I do like honey. All right, I'm going to make you a fine honey. Here, go to sleep. Let me get that rib. Here you go, Eve. Look at there. Boom. brick house, ain't she? Adam's like, I don't know what that is, but I think so. So all these cycles have kept happening. So what's happened, and that actually does lead into the calendar discussion, because the reason we follow a different calendar than the traditional Hebrew calendar is because the leadership of the people of God had become illegitimate at a certain point, and their calendar had gotten switched. Just little tiny deviation, so that 1600 years later, here we are now, and never the two shall meet in terms of the overlap between them. So same thing happens in pre-flood that happens post-flood. Jubilees tells you straight up. And after the flood, the fallen ones were back at it again, doing all the same stuff that they were essentially used to doing for probably 1,000 years or so before that, leading to the flood. And the way it feels like the Father works is that everybody has free will. The angels, the demon, Enoch tells you that the wind and the sun and all of these things have free will. So if they just decide they don't want to rise today, they don't have to do it. They suffer punishment, or consequences, we'll say, for not doing that, and they're very faithful to what they're asked, just like Michael and the majority of the angels that did not fall with Lucifer. But every creation has free will. So when something sets up, when Noah's sons, particularly Ham and Japheth, go off and do the same stuff that was happening before the flood, God's just like, all right, we got to let this play out, and my hand will guide and steer a remnant, but maybe that'll happen in 1,000 years. So close to 1,000 years later, Abraham is who God basically, in a Noah-like fashion, says, yeah, like, people don't even know my name anymore. Like, this is a problem here. Abraham, you have logic, and, I've halfway inspired your bloodline, thanks probably to Shem keeping his pants up, so to speak, however many generations before you. So I'm going to honor Shem's faithfulness, and I'm going to bless his seed, Abraham. And there's all kinds of prophecies about how Abraham, and this is mostly, it's kind of, you remember the story about the wise men going to Herod and being like, hey, the Messiah's going to be born. We were seeing it in the stars. Like, I'm pretty sure this is a problem for you. And Herod was like, really? Okay, kill all the boys that are 2 years or younger. Like, I don't want nobody to mess my money up. Well, something kind of similar happened with Nimrod at the time during Abraham's day, during Terah's day. And I believe I have to go back and read it because it's been a couple years now since I've read it. But I believe the way that the story goes is that a prophet or somebody comes to Nimrod and it's like, listen, somebody's going to be born that's about to upset your kingdom. And Nimrod is like, who? And it turns out that it's Terah's son. And he bribes him. He offers him like all this money and horses and stuff if he can like have your kid. To his, like, one of his soldiers who Abraham's dad was in the bigger picture. And Terah goes, yeah, no, sorry. If like somebody came offered you a horse for your favorite son, would you give it to him? Like, probably not. Like, thank you for the horse offering, but no thank you. I'll keep my son. And as a result, Abraham is born, and he grows, and he's very smart. And he has some pretty interesting experience similar to Daniel and the lions. And this was after his kind of conversion, if you will. But Abraham establishes a new covenant with God because of Abram's willingness at the time to be on point with what Yah was asking humankind to do, which was operate this way, not this way. Don't do what these pagan fallen angels and Nephilims and all them do. Stay with your own kind, keep this Torah, do these things, right? And then he establishes that promise through Abraham. Abraham jumps the gun with Ishmael because Sarah's too old. So Ishmael's born with Hagar, and then Isaac is later born through Sarah, who then has Esau and Jacob, who become this kind of model for how the redemption plan is set forth in the form of Yeshua, specifically through Judah. So Levi and Judah are two sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin. 12 sons. Judah is number 4, Levi's number 3. The priestly line of Levi is important. Moses and Aaron come from that line. That's why they were priests. because the code of conduct for the people of Israel, of Jacob, were codified specifically through Levi. Like Levi says, listen up, everybody. All that debauchery is some foolishness. I don't want to see no more of it in this camp. Righteousness has to prevail through this seed line. So in order for that to happen, we need to actually be strict about what we say is allowable and what is not allowable. This is not because God is some mean, vengeful Old Testament God, but because he loves us and he actually wants to see more humans than Nephilim on the earth. Everybody on board? Okay, great.
This is perfect you said that. So from circling back to the calendar, would you say that he's the one that said we need to get the calendar back in order?
Yes. Well, he's the one that maintained the calendar order because he was, by his birth, had been instructed to do so from his grandfather. So keeping in mind, Abraham is the one who really made the change. He raises his sons in a proper fashion. So by the time Jacob is alive and he has 12 sons, they're all familiar with the ways of Yah by this point. Shem, because he had kept Enoch's text, Enoch was the original one who penned the calendar. And that's why Enoch's so significant, which is why I think they took him out. It's because Enoch busts up all of NASA's lies. Enoch busts up all of Hillel's lies. Enoch busts up all of Pope Gregory's lies. It's like a lot of different realities hinge on understanding Enoch's perspective on the beginning. And Enoch is the one.
He had a unique perspective too, because he was on earth and then he went back to God and he was like, let's just hang out. And then he went back to earth.
Yeah, several times.
That's quite a perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And it talks through this whole book about just time Enoch would spend with the angels, where he's like, "Ooh, what's that? Oh, but what's that over there? Why is that tree there? What's that mountain do?" And all the angels are like, "Enoch, like, bro, that's called a fruitberry tree. It's really tasty. Why do you ask these questions? We could tell you about anything in the entire universe, and you want to know about this speck of dirt. Okay, it's called a super duper fruit. I don't know, like pick a name, right?" And Enoch is given instructions on really how to archive the backstory or the history of the foundation of the world. Which is, again, why I believe they've allowed his book to come out now, at least be talked about more, because there's a code. Yah controls this whole dynamic. For as much as we talk about fallen angels and Nephilim and all this stuff, they have a pecking order in the list. Yahweh, this individual, this creator, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is the word that became flesh. He is all these things that we read about in the Bible, but we sometimes, at least for me, I sometimes forget about how important it is that we recognize that he's allowing these things to happen for his goodwill and for his purpose. So Enoch is given this special relationship where he understands the sun and the moon and what their purpose is and how they actually interchange with one another. The whole day is based on a 364-day cycle where you identify the summer solstice, the spring equinox, not the summer solstice, the spring equinox, the day that, using a sundial, everybody in the neighboring regions can agree is the middle point between the darkest day and the lightest day. And starting from that day, you consider as the creation story goes that the sun and moon were created on the fourth day. So what people do in the Zadokite calendar movement, at least one subset of that movement, is they identify when the spring equinox is using the sun, not a lunar-based system. And this is where the modern day Jewish calendar differs from the Zadokite calendars, because everything about Lucifer's wake was all about repurposing what the moon and the sun were supposed to represent. Astrology, great example. The stars, like all of that stuff was created by Yah. The system that was set up was ordered on purpose to represent the pattern of observation that even people like Abraham were skilled at recognizing, so they know what season's coming up, when it's time to plant. They didn't have Siri to remind them, or Google or Alexa or something to shout across the room. They had to actually make sure that they got the seeds in the ground that planting season, or they was all going to be hungry come fall or come spring. And these were the reasons behind the stars and the moon and the sun for life sustenance. And they've just been perverted. So Enoch's calendar was based on sun identification and then beginning your counting from that point. If you remember, in the Old Testament, in the Torah, in the book of Leviticus, it says, and on the second month of the 14th day, you are to have for yourself Passover. This is where it's explaining Passover. They never said February 14th. They said second month, 14th day, meaning depending on when we start counting the first month, your day might be different from my day. So it was paramount to all be on the same picture as to when the head of the year begins. Modern day Jewish teachings would have one believe that Rosh Hashanah, which translates to head of the year, is the beginning of the year, but that's not true. Yah is very simple. When spring comes out, when the winter is dead and the life begins again, trees bud, their buds and pollen starts coming out and the bees and birds start chirping again. This is the head of the new cycle. The cold dead of death and no trees and no leaves and things like that is the end of a cycle. It's very much like human existence, animal existence, plant existence, very patterned in his way. This is why his order is very simple and very ordered. And the new world order is all about turning it upside down, calling the spring the fall, making a boy a girl and a girl a boy, and both a neither and neither a both. It's like everything is just about confusing the order.
The sleight of hand of definition.
Right, exactly. The sleight of hand of definition. And so the calendar issue first is established. I don't say the issue, the calendar, the true calendar of how to observe these appointed times and feasts are codified by Enoch. Now they are forgotten about for a period of time, reintroduced after a period of time, learned about through Shem and his descendants, forgotten about through Ham and his descendants, Japheth and his descendants, and then reestablished in the form of Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, through Levi specifically, who later came to have a son named Zadok, Z-A-D-O-K, or T-S-A-D-O-K, D-O-Q, depending on how, the person is translating it. But Zadok translates to righteousness. And in the book of Ezekiel, we read, basically God is saying to Ezekiel, it's like, here we go again. Every time I come in the earth, y'all in the kitchen, messing up all my plans, eating up all the broccoli casserole. I'm sick of it. All y'all high priests, y'all high. Y'all need to go sit somewhere. Zadok, you the only one who I'm actually recognizing as legitimate, because by this point, several hundred years after the splits of the northern and southern house, the priesthood system, keeping in mind, this is the people who are meant to guide Israel spiritually, Israel just being a family. I try to help people phrase these concepts in new categories so that you can wrap your head around how this story happened. Daniel, you got brothers and sisters. Israel is your dad and you're Levi, and your dad is Judah. Your brother rather is Judah, and your sister is one of the sisters that they had. I forgot, Tamar, or the other one. And it's no more, the story begins no more complex than that. It's literally just a guy and his children, and how they're educated, they go on to educate their children. And eventually righteousness prevails for a time and then wanes after a time. And then the children of Israel call on Yah and he delivers them. And so it resurges after a time, and then it wanes after a time. The books of Chronicles talk about so-and-so did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So-and-so did great in the eyes of the Lord. These are the different kings and the leaders of Israel that were either thumbs up as far as Yah was concerned or thumbs down as far as Yah was concerned. And anytime you read about the ones who were thumbs down, it was always because they were mixing Yah's code of conduct with the pagan nation's code of conduct, marrying into them, putting up Asherah poles and under trees on high mountains, and creating these statues basically of observance to these pagan mighty ones, same ones that their great grandfather Abraham recognized back when his name was still Abram before it was changed to Abraham, that this is ridiculous. Why are we worshiping the God of thunder when we should worship the God who created thunder? Why are we worshiping the God of fire when we should worship the God who created the elements that produce fire, or the sun or the moon?
And who was the person who questioned that?
Abraham was the initial questioner. Yeah.
Okay,
he was Abram.
So could you say, would it be safe to say that the pagan viewpoint comes from the fallen Watcher 200's children that have just been navigating the earth to indoctrinate truth into division?
Yes, 100%. And by navigating, you mean leading, like becoming the kings, queens, popes, czars, the emperors of the earth. But yes, absolutely. And this is why it's so important for the leadership of a house to be right, spiritually speaking. And then as you extrapolate that out, of a people, of the house of Israel, of a nation. So it's very much, again, Yah builds all of these principles off of like house, tent peg, seed, these basic agricultural precepts that span the ages, which is why they still apply now as they did 4,000 years ago. But the righteousness has always been challenged. It's almost like saying in a game of basketball, you don't bother double teaming the guy who can't shoot, right?
Yeah.
If someone's got a righteous 3-pointer, that's the one that y'all attack. Him. Don't, in fact, foul him. Like, just don't let him score, right? That's the point. It's like, concentrate on that. And Lucifer has approached spiritual warfare the same exact way. Okay, we hear you, Zoroaster. Yeah, we got y'all. Okay, pagan. Okay. Let's get these Yah-fearing people. And they were most concentrated in the bloodlines that extended from the Abrahamic faith. So that's why I do include Islam, Judaism, and Christianity in this kind of Western larger bubble, because I am not a genetic prophet, right? I can't tell who's technically from who. We're all a bit of a mix at this point, most likely. So it's not about, well, I'm the chosen people and you're not, or your people don't look like my people, so therefore we're the people and y'all aren't. It's about, let's all realize we was all lied to. Okay, everybody on board? Okay, let's figure out how to work together to make the truth go this direction, like what Yeshua did. Disciple, lady with an issue of blood, woman at the well, person over here, Lazarus, boom, boom, boom. He wasn't like, let me go talk to the high priest and see if I can set up a webinar. No, it was like the control and the change came from this direction. And the same is true for Moses, Gideon, Samuel, Elisha, Elijah, all the prophets, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Zechariah, Haggai, Malachi, all of those cats, regular Joes like you and me. Listen, God said this. I don't know. Y'all want to listen what he says. It's not pretty, but y'all are all being disobedient. And if y'all don't stop, y'all are going to die. Don't hit me. Don't shoot me. I'm just the messenger. Give us a prophet that'll say nice things. You remember the story in Jeremiah? He's like, not Jeremiah. Like, I don't like him. He always prophesies negative stuff. Like, get this other prophet over here. Peter Popoff, he says nice things. I just got to give him $15 and then all my sins are, like, all my ailments are healed. He sends me a napkin through FedEx. And he liked, the false prophets have always been useful to Lucifer's endeavor. So let's get back to the calendar, because that's the real question. As time transpired and Abraham's affirmed belief system through Jacob, through his children, who are the tribes of Israel, who all split, whereas Judah stays in the region, the rest just kind of like scatter and become what people consider Gentiles, which is why when Yeshua comes, he's like, I don't come for the Gentiles. I'm coming for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, because he already knew all y'all people that y'all call Gentiles, this is actually Issachar, Zebulun, Gad, Asher, Dan. They've just matriculated outward. Judah, presently, well, the people that call themselves Judah are trying to lay claim to the entire Hebrew Israelite culture when they're 1/12 of it, truthfully. And the pecking order has been misaligned, and they're only doing that because they recognize that the scriptures do speak of a special position that Israel carries in the eyes of God. And if they can, Hegelian and trick and hide history and change and Rockefeller inspire everybody's understanding to not fully understand that A, Judah is not all of Israel, and B, y'all not actually Judah, then nobody would know the trick that they're pulling and would, lend their support because, well, it says here in the book that we're supposed to support Israel. He who's kind to Israel is blessed. And if you're mean to Israel, you get cursed. So I guess we should be blessing Israel because they say that they're Israel. And I haven't actually done the research to identify that they're lying. So, all right, here we go. Right. So that's what's happened modern time. But in and around Ezekiel's day is when God speaks to Ezekiel and he's like, listen, Israel is pissing me off. I'm pissed. I've been telling y'all for all these years, y'all done seen me deliver y'all and rescue y'all and bless y'all. And here y'all are worshiping these nonsense idols. Like, I'm fed up. I should burn you all. I said I wasn't going to drown you with the flood, but I didn't say I wasn't going to burn you up. And, prophets at the time are like, God, please don't do that. Please. Like, we really need to stay alive. God's like, oh, okay. Whew, I'm merciful. So you're right. I'm not going to do this because I do love y'all. But it's like any good dad with their kid. They're like, if this kid don't get, I love you, but I took you into this world, but I could take you out. He's the only one who can truly say that statement and actually follow through with it without being considered a straight up murderer. But he says to Ezekiel, all of the priesthood at this point is illegitimate with the exception of my righteous servant Zadok. So I am acknowledging to you, Ezekiel, that all of the legitimate priests that I consider legitimate come from the line of Zadok because he has proven with his life and his actions that he is the one about my mission, and all these other jokesters, get away from me. I never knew you. Right. And so that's why each of our lives are important. Like we hear this story and we think Moses, Abraham, Jesus, all these highlight points along the timeline. But Zadok was a person just like me and you. He was in his 30s at one point. He wanted to holler at women at one point. And for whatever temptations he was given or was able to overcome, he was seen as righteous and his offspring was blessed because of that. So Zadok comes and establishes kind of like an asterisk point for what is considered legitimate. But the Zadokites, those of Zadok, like the Israelites are from Israel, the person. The Zadokite culture extends from Zadok, the person, followed the Enochian calendar, the one from the very beginning. Because this is always about reconnecting with the beginning, back to the original world order. It's like back. Okay. We've moved way over here. Okay, back.
Yeah.
And throughout different times in Israel's history,
you can see how far away it would become because you're talking 1,000 years.
Yeah, several hundred of thousands of years. And that's the only game that the devil's been able to really have on us is time, the long play, the slow burn, the boiling the frog on simmer, like really taking forever so that we don't understand that even 200 years ago, concepts that we consider like, oh, everybody believes in this, literally didn't even exist, right? But 200 years, I don't know any of my relatives that are 200 years old. And the oldest one I know at this point is like in her late 80s or 90s, right? So they've made sure that from food and poisons and toxins and environmental information is snuffed out. By the way, we control all the printing presses and the books and the internet now, so we delete whatever we don't want. And we keep introducing new concepts to you and making this current generation feel like the enlightened, most supreme generation when we're most likely like the dumbest down one. Like most people put a piece of paper over their face for a virus that's literally not anywhere, right? You get
I was just about to say that slow burn is wear a mask now and 6 months later they're still wearing a mask.
It's just for 2 weeks. Don't question it, or you kill people. Like, do I know? I've been at home since I had a baby 4 months ago. I literally haven't been out of the house, so I'm pretty sure I don't have anything. Shut up. You're a murderer. Put it on. All right. Like, well, you're in the restaurant, you walk across the door. Okay, you can take it off to eat. It's like, okay. Like nothing makes sense, right? But just like you said, put it on for 2 weeks, stay at home for 2 weeks, 7 months later, here we all are. Going into wave 2, right? Whatever. And So what we determined in that season in 2015, 2016, when we really discovered, holy smokes, we're supposed to have been keeping this Torah this whole time. I was always torn as to how Yeshua could say, wide is the gate that leads unto destruction, and many there be that find it. But narrow is the way, the path that leads unto life, and few there be that find it. I remember being like, how on earth do 2.2 billion people correlate with few there be that find it? Like, I just could not, I don't know, I just could not think of how that was until I began to investigate the lines, Freemasonry, how it's, seeded its grubby little ideologies into modern Christianity, how even portions of the text have been, under Roman control for the last 1900 years or so. And even before that was under Sanhedrin control, which was Babylonian control, because it all hinges on the moments where Israel got captured.
Hold up.
What I want to make sure is that the audience understands a clear answer of why the calendar is important.
Okay.
Because what we've talked about is like,
Backstory.
I'm like, yes, okay, that makes sense. But for someone who just came in, it's like, what are these guys talking about?
Right, got it. That's good.
So
I like this because it helps me.
A clear, concise answer that really explains to the viewer what is the calendar and why is it important. You know what I mean?
Yes. So when we became aware that keeping the feast of Yahweh were his appointed times, consider that, appointed times, appointments. If Daniel says, all right, I'm going to meet y'all on the 3rd at my house, we better figure out which 3rd he's talking about, right? If he says, all right, meet me at 4 p.m., we better figure out 4 p.m. Israel time, 4 p.m. America time, Puerto Rico time, Eastern time, LA time, like 4 p.m., right? If we're to be meeting the Father's appointments. And that's the Hebrew translation of these feasts, these moedim, are the appointed times, the times where Yah says, I am sovereign, I am the creator, and I will be here at this time. Join me. The invitation. It's like going to a birthday party. We want to figure out we got the right date, and we got the right time and the right location. So we began going, all right, Yeshua said, I do not come to abolish the Torah, but to fulfill it. When we reinvestigate what fulfill means, it's more like completing a thing to present it to its fullest extent, like a roster, like a basketball team. Once the last cuts have been made and you've made the team, the game doesn't just go, all right, we're done. Everybody go home. That's when the game begins, is when the team is fulfilled. So in the same sense, this feast began to kind of take on this new form and this new, I guess, attribution or codification or meaning, if you will, when Yeshua fulfilled the Torah in his presence on earth. And I became obsessed with learning. The whole process of this whole research began with, who is Jesus? Like, who is the real Jesus? Like, I've got to figure out. As I did that, I found Jesus kept Torah. Okay, cool. Jesus kept the feast. Okay, great. Jesus didn't observe the pagan holidays of his time. Okay, great. We'll cut out the pagan holidays.
Wait. Jesus what now?
Did not observe pagan holidays that were.
And what are those holidays?
Well, those holidays have gone by many names, but the 3 most popular ones that we have today are Christmas, Easter, and Halloween.
Okay, now, I'm glad you brought that up. Now, with people who don't mean bad by celebrating these holidays, who just really like, oh, it's Thanksgiving, what would you say to those people? Because they love Jesus, and you're saying Jesus did not observe those days, and they could literally love those holidays, not for any pagan reason.
Right.
What would you tell those people?
I would tell them the same thing that I was told. He understands that we've all been misled. He does seek your heart out, and he does search one's heart. But if we look at the scriptures, about every single time God talks about man's heart, it's always bad. Man's heart is wickedness and full of, so he's looking at your heart, but he wants to see that your heart is about serving him. If I dated some girl named Trina, whose birthday was on August 15th, and my wife's birthday is on May 15th. Come August 15th, and I go, baby, listen, Trina, my ex, she used to love these chocolate treats, and I'm just going to buy you some chocolate treats. I love you. But I remember she used to like this, and I remember the lady at the store, and she gives me a discount, and we high five every time. So I realize it's not your birthday, it's Trina's birthday, but I'm not talking to her anymore. I totally love you, but here's happy birthday on her birthday, right? It's essentially kind of like...
That's horrible.
Right. It's horrible. And so the purpose of celebrating Jesus's birthday is to celebrate his birthday, right? Well, we know that it wasn't on December 25th. The truth about when it was is a bit nuanced, and there's verses that do kind of give you clues as to the season that it was in Sukkot. When Mary came and there was no room for her in the inn, that was because it was a festival going on, and it was a bunch of people in Bethlehem at the time. They was buying up the Marriotts and the La Quinta Inns and all the different places. It was all taken up. Sorry, no vacancy. Really? Oh, I mean, I get it, Sukkot is happening, but I'm about to pop. My water broke. I need to get to a bed somewhere. And this is how the Messiah comes in a manger, humbling himself in this way, being the model for that humility. So I would tell people with regard to these pagan holidays that just pray for the heart of the Father. Say, God, I want to know what your heart is around these holidays. If you feel that I should observe them, confirm that. But if you feel that what Chris is saying or what other people might be suggesting, that these are rooted in paganism, maybe help me understand how that looks and convict me that I shouldn't. And that's what we did. And we simply asked him, and then he basically gave us a Google Drive of like 8,000 gigabytes of information and evidence that yes, Saturnalia is most assuredly pagan. And not only did the gingerbread man extend from them using, practicing cannibalism, human sacrifice specifically to the Jews that they had captured at the time, but it was basically like the movie The Purge meets some Santa Clarita Diet movie or something, where they're just dealing with Satanism through and through in the form of the Roman leadership. And the Roman leadership has governed and sanctioned much of what Protestant and Catholic and Jewish and Islam considers today as the extensions of these Abrahamic faiths, based on a culture that Rome captured in 70 AD and completely has controlled since, and still controls now.
You're talking about the Catholics?
I'm talking about the Catholic institution that was the emperors before the popes became a thing, and was the Herodians and the Sadducees before the emperors became a thing. So
yes, so this is all good because you really made it very black and white as far as the explanation of the what was it, Tina
Mm-hmm.
and your wife explanation. That really explained the importance of the calendar. And really, if you dissect that, it's because you have love for your wife,
right,
and you want to show that appreciation by listening and actually acting upon your love for her.
right,
And you bringing up Tina's love for chocolates to your wife, to me, is absolutely despicable.
right.
But I could see the sleight of hand of the enemy changing the dates, the calendars, the gingerbread, the nostalgic feel of this, and putting all these different outfits on to make it seem like, oh, we're just gonna put holly on our Christmas tree and a star that we don't know what it really means,
Right,
but
exactly.
it's something crazy.
Exactly.
We're gonna doll it up. So the Tina metaphor that you put completely overrides the understanding of your action of love for your wife, not to even acknowledge that exists.
Right.
So the importance of the calendar really boils down, from what I gather, is that you really love Yeshua and what he said to begin with.
Correct.
And that
And
goes
what
back
he
to
did.
the order.
Yes, absolutely. And not only him and what he said, but what he did. Yeshua kept the Zadokite calendar because he recognized at the time that the leadership of Israel was illegitimate. This is the reason Herod wanted to kill all the Jews, because not only was Yeshua like technically more pure to the throne in terms of being from Zadok and from Judah, the kingly line and the priestly line, but the leadership was always afraid because the prophecies basically said a Messiah will come to save Israel. And they were like, where is he at? Because I'm going to kill him the second he gets here. And so when we find these truths out about Yeshua, it's because we love him so much that we not only pull away from the things that make him feel bad, like in the bride sense, where we're acknowledging a former bride's birthday on his birthday, so to speak. But when it comes to the actual feasts that we do begin doing, these feasts like Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Trumpets, Shavuot, Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, we find that, even amongst the Jewish leadership, even when we're not talking about the pagan holidays that have been added in from the Roman leadership, but even amongst the Jewish leadership of his time, the priesthood had already left Zadok 200-300 years prior to Yeshua showing up. Again, which is why the leadership's so spooked about him in the first place, because they're like, yo, this dude could actually unseat us. Like, he's the one who gets the Iron Throne, so to speak. He's the true Targaryen. I hate using the Targaryen metaphor, but in a Game of Thrones sense, he's the Daenerys. He's like the actual one that's legitimately most in line to this throne, and we recognize that. So we don't like that, so we're going to kill this dude. But the reason that we use the Zadokite calendar now, and I'll keep this part short so we can tie it on up, is because the Hillel too. First of all, Hillel is how you say Satan, basically, in Hebrew.
Hold on. Wait. I got to go to the bathroom, and I don't want to be like thinking about the bathroom.
Okay.
Stop at the Hillel.
Hillel, got it. So Hillel, he held the office of Nazi. The Nazi is the prince or the president of an office. So he was basically the president of the Sanhedrin between 320 and 385 CE, Common Era, or AD. So that means that sometime between 320 and 325, he does a couple instances, he does a couple key things that take the Jewish leadership at the time and go, doink. So that by 1,000 years later, in 1325 is way over here, and by another 700 years is way over here, right? And what he does is he says, I'm going to institute a new calendar. Thank you. It's based off of 365. Well, poor Gregory, like the Roman leadership and the Sanhedrin leadership did a 1-2 shimmy wop bop baloo bop a wop bam boom to switch up the extension of Israel. And what they did was they added a day to the calendar and then reworked how the Jewish calendar was calculated based on the moon, based on when the year began, and all these different things, which threw off the dates of observance of these appointed times. Because in the Torah, God doesn't say on September 15th, celebrate Yom Teruah. He says, and in the 7th month on the 14th day, or on the day. So if day 1 is off, then the whole rest of the thing gets off for that year. And the reason I believe that they threw it off is because they want you to miss the meeting. They don't want you to actually make the appointed time that Yah establishes as his appointed time, where he shows up. And again, there's a whole conversation about grace and forgiveness that exists within this, but the true order of his initial plan was to say, on this day in this month, I will be here. Enoch, my servant, has given you the tools of how to know when to begin counting the months. And as long as you stick with Enoch's instruction, you'll always hit the date right. If you go with Hillel's instruction or Gregory's instruction, they're going to throw you off because they were pagan leadership that was not legitimate by this point in history, in the history of Israel, 325 AD. So, or 320 to 385. So somewhere around when the Council of Nicaea took place in 325, all these sidebar comments. The reason we keep the Zadokite calendar today is because 2 or 3 years into keeping, the feast, right? We started with Passover. We ended up with, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, and we were kind of fumbling through it. And I'm sure the angels and the Father were like, A for effort, but like, wow, we got to teach you guys what's really up. And he's been patient with us. So for the last 5 years, as we've halfway done it right or screwed up, or this day, I was supposed to be on this, oh crap, which day was, he's been with us this entire time. And 2 or 3 years into it, he made us aware, tap, 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 Chris, I see your heart and I'm totally with you on this. But just so you know, they lied to you about which day is the proper day that I set the appointed times. And again, this was all based on love for Yeshua. So this is not about like elitism or separatism or like, deviant ideals. This is simply, we want to do exactly what Yah set up for Yeshua. We want to get back to the truth, however that looks. And the truth has led us to the fact that in the days of Hillel II, they changed the official Jewish calendar to be based off of a lunisolar calendar, which is like halves. Some things are based on the moon, some things are based on the sun, which just throws off the whole order of it. So we said, fine, which calendar did Jesus use? Oh, the Zadokite calendar, because not only was that considered the official one of the group that were called the Ebionites or the Essenes or the Nazareans. They have different names depending on whose literature you're reading. But these were the people contemporary with Jesus. Alive when he was alive, his cousins, mama, sister-in-law, cousins, baby girlfriend, daddy, baby mama, next door neighbor, and all them who recognized who he was were a part of what people call the community at Qumran, Qumran. The reason that city is specific is because that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. The Dead Sea Scrolls, conversation for a whole different day, in a nutshell, is modern paleological, archaeological evidence that supports the veracity, not only of the Bible in many cases, but also the culture that was specific to that Hebrew people that by and large has been bleached out of the conversation 1800 years later. Nobody understands the concept of Torah, and they don't understand that Torah is like the foundation of the Hebrew faith. We're told, oh, we're Gentiles. That was the old law. We don't have to do that anymore. And the Father is the same today, yesterday, and forever. That world order he set up with his Torah was how to establish a loving relationship between him and between your fellow man. When Poetica is 40, she's 4 or 5 now, but when she's much older, her decorum of how to acknowledge and communicate love with you and with her sister and fellow humans is not going to somehow change or be nullified, right? If you tell her at 4, respect people, share your toys, say I'm sorry when you screw up. These are not things that you want her to like someday later just go, oh, we don't have to do that anymore because it's written on my heart, conceptually speaking. We want to write them on our heart like we write, the ABC song on our heart because we've sung it so many times, right? We focus on it as opposed to abrogating it. And this is where I believe Jesus has a lot to say in the New Testament, particularly in Matthew, about people who say that they knew me and they heal the sick and cast out demons in your name. And I'll say to you, depart from me, I never knew you, you worker of iniquity. Iniquity basically means you person who did not live a life based on my instructions, because it was Yeshua that gave Moses those instructions. Anytime you read the Spirit of the Lord, the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses, that angel of the Lord most of the time was the Spirit of Yeshua. So when you read, in the beginning, the Word was with God and the Word was God, people have oversimplify that to physically mean like a series of texts that may or may not have been protected for thousands of years. When the truth is, it was the Spirit of Yeshua, being a pre-existing creation since before Genesis, who was with God at the foundation of the world, which is why it says, and we made man in our own image, and our image, man and woman, we created them. It's got these plural words for what we think is a singular individual creating it, but that was Yeshua the whole time. The pillar of fire by day and the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. In the case of the Exodus, that was the Spirit of Yeshua operating as the fiduciary servant of Yahweh. So it's echad, it's one unified thing, and in a sense, Jesus is God to the degree that they're commissioning the same thing. It's like saying, my right arm is me. It's like, well, yes, but it is just my right arm. It's not like the arm is the entire like fruition of me, but it does what I command it to do every single time. And that is the Hebraic way to look at where Jesus lines up with God and the whole dynamic. The Trinity is a Babylonian thing that was much later added. But that's a different conversation for a different day. So the calendar culminates with Zadok being established as the righteous priest who maintained an allegiance to Enoch's original calendar, all pointing back to the beginning, that Yeshua and the subset of Jewish people from the tribe of Judah at the time, individuals, acknowledged and honored and followed. So when we learned, oh, the Zadokite calendar is different than the Hillel calendar, great, we'll follow the Zadokite calendar. Now, we still follow the Gregorian one when it comes to meetings and work, like modern existence. But when it comes to the Hebrew observations of the Hebrew feast, we follow the nugget of truth from the beginning that was established, that has been carried through the ages and kind of like reinvigorized is not a word, re-energized in the form of the Dead Sea Scrolls findings, where we can go, no way, that's so crazy. Like, the group of people who was with Jesus, they were using this calendar, and it wasn't this other calendar, because that one wasn't even created for another 280 something years. Like, no way, we're going to get back to doing this one. And when I first discovered this, it was like me and a guy on YouTube, and I was like, how is this guy the only person that knows? This is so crazy. And then we began having this conversation with more people, and we found there's a lot of people who are figuring this out, spurred on by exactly what you said, their love for Yeshua, for Messiah. We want to know who he is. We love Jesus, so let's actually figure out who he is. Like, if you love Melissa, but you don't know what her mama name is, her aunt's name is, you see what I'm saying? It's like the language and the action has been Hegelian dialect in all of these religions, especially Christianity. We love him, but we don't even know that his birthday wasn't the 25th, or that he celebrated Sukkot. Or that if we do know that he did that, that it happened on a calendar that's not equivalent to the calendar that we're given today. So these are the things that I've just learned in my journey that have helped me feel like, all right, this is an appointed time. I believe this is where God says he'll be at this time. So I'm going to show up because he set the appointment, not Hillel, not Gregory, not even Enoch. Enoch just wrote it down, but Yah said it. And that's why we follow this calendar today. That is, people consider it Jewish because they have no frame of reference. And I don't even hate on people for that, but it's not a Jewish thing. It's a Yah thing. It's a God thing. Judah being one of the 12 sons whose nations Abraham was delivering from Egypt at the time, who were given these 10 commandments in this Torah because of who they represented to God, a promise to his servant Abraham, through his servant Shem, through his servant Noah, through his servant Enoch, through Adam.
That is good. We are over an hour. There's so much that's been talked about here, but really the answer to the question is, why do we hold to this calendar? And it's really because of Yeshua's love for us and our love for him. Yeah. That's really the answer.
That's the answer, yes.
And if you really have the connection of love, like me to my wife or you to yours, you will find out all things about her. And the sleight of hand is that the all things about her gets convoluted to, well, what about this? What about this ex-girlfriend? What about this? And all this kind of stuff. And then there's no longer a singular path to the love that you have for your wife. It becomes a spectrum of understandings of what love is, which convolutes the validity of why the order should be kept. Yeah. I love my wife. She loves me. Right. She likes red velvet cake. I buy her red velvet cake. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's not that she loves cake. It's that she loves red velvet cake. Right. So the convolution is back to what we talked about, is the sleight of hand. And that's where we get all this gingerbread man and all that kind of stuff.
Right. The tree.
But I don't want to harp in on people who really have a heart to just celebrate Christmas and all that kind of stuff. That's something that, like you said, you're just going to have to pray to Yeshua and ask him, hey, I like Christmas. but what do you say about Christmas?
Right.
And you have that conversation with him.
That's the best and most humble way I could say to explain it. I will say that I'm a pragmatist, so it's not been easy. This coming Christmas will be the fourth one, 26, 89, fifth one that we're not celebrating. And every year it's a new dance to figure out how to like not offend this family member and make sure we say hey to this family member because they don't all get it. And we do it with love. And if any of them want to know why, and some of them do, they ask and we tell them. But for the most part, we realize that everybody has their own spiritual journey. And for us, we just said, I'd rather be ostracized or ridiculed or misunderstood now than to stand in front of the pearly gates and be like, well, I was made aware that this was pagan, but I liked it. And I felt bad because my aunt made me feel bad for not showing up when she was hosting Christmas that year. So I did it anyway, right? It's not going to be a good enough excuse come Judgment Day. And for the most part, a lot of people don't know this. So I do think that there's a period of mercy. But at the same time, I guarantee you that at some places during Abraham's time, nobody was aware that Yahweh was a thing, and that didn't stop them from being killed. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's a righteousness thing, and then there's a justice component. And justice says that when you honor Lucifer's ways, you reap the repercussions of honoring Lucifer's ways, and vice versa. When you honor Yah's ways, you reap the benefits of honoring Yah's ways. And so it's really no more simple than that. I know I can get very complex and verbose with how I go about explaining it. And I'm usually just doing that to provide a foundational thing so that when I say, well, we don't do this and we do this, people are like, well, who is this guy? What does he know, right?
Yeah, I mean, but it also humanizes your explanation, because if you just were like, oh, well, it's because the Bible and Yeshua and this and that, then there's no humanity in that.
Right.
And your explanation of explaining all of it then gets the viewer to be like, this is a human, and he's speaking in love, and then let me listen with a more open ear than someone just telling me what I'm doing is wrong.
Right.
And no one wants to be told what they're doing is wrong, because then they get offensive, and then they're like, F you. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So all that to be said, I guess the next explanation would be what to celebrate and when. You know what I mean? Because to me, even when you were speaking, I know last year we talked to you all about making Christmas songs, and we wanted to have the Christmas spirit and all that. And that was done legitimately because we just loved Christmas. But we've learned so much from when we asked you last year to now that we're like, oh, well, let's change it around.
Yeah.
You know, so maybe the next conversation could be just a very concise explanation of when to celebrate, and what to stay away from, you know, because if the viewer is looking at this from the first time and now is kind of feeling offensive because you just told them Christmas is of the devil, and they're like, what are you talking about? They might be a little bit apprehensive of you changing the date on something. So, but all that to be said, the importance of the calendar is because you love Yeshua and you're going to listen to someone you love.
Right.
And now it's like, okay, now that I'm listening to someone that I love, then what am I supposed to do to keep the order? Back to what we talked about the order. We don't want to be back in Enoch, where Enoch went to God and he says to him, the order is not in order. We don't want any parts of that, because the order of your love to your wife is very clear. Right,
exactly. There's no confusion. Unclear, if there was, I would be suffering the brunt of that confusion.
Yeah, there'll be shoes flying everywhere. You know?
Purses, shoes, lipstick, applicators, all kinds of things.
Yeah, there's no, you know that there's an order. So this was a great explanation. We can go into the next conversation of, like I said, what the dates are. And then the other thing from this conversation, which you kept talking about, that spurred this other question, because you did bring up the Masons and all that kind of stuff. And it's a sleight of hand, but when something like that gets interjected into a thought process, you're talking about a whole nother religious mindset that gets thrown in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
So in the next conversation, let's explain what to celebrate,
Mm-hmm.
and then explain that, and then explain what is the deal with the Freemasons and all that kind of stuff, and how did they add to the convolution of the pure love of Yeshua?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else that you want to say to wrap this up?
The only thing that I'll say is, it was a thing that I meant to mention earlier. So I learned this, ironically, from becoming aware of the Luciferian satanic side of how things are done. But when they perform rituals, imagine like this video game, like where you have this puzzle where these two things are rotating and there's an opening on either side, and there's a point at which the openings cross so that the character can go through. It's kind of like some sort of puzzle game, or there's a lot of video games based on this idea. Even Mario, you have to wait for the platform to get over here to hop on to get,
Yeah.
The reason
Wow.
that rituals and rites exist is because there is an energetic and cosmic reality to synchronization amongst planetary bodies, spirits, energies, humans, and everything up and down the list. Now, the Father's appointed times are the initial first example of that. But downwind, the great culture vulture Lucifer has manipulated and matriculated that to follow the zodiac, or all these different extrapolations of what was considered a righteous creation. And the reason, like when you learn about some of these satanic rituals, they have to stand in the same place and hold their feet at a specific angle and do this before this and make sure to pour that into that in this order. And the reason for the order is it's almost like reintroducing a portal. I hate using that word because it puts it in sci-fi, but think of it more or less like an energy straw, like a funnel, a thing where something,
a memorization of something.
Kind of,
right?
yeah. It's almost like a junkie, right? They can get back into the same vein that they've used a bunch, but going into a new vein is a bit more of a tricky situation. Similar premise. And because of this, I learned that, even when we try to reclaim these holidays and call it Resurrection Day, or call it, Fall Festival, we're not doing Halloween, we're doing Fall Festival, you're still lending energy to that day. And the energy is the currency of the spirit world. So they don't actually care what you call it, because it wasn't even called what you're calling it now 200 years ago or 400 years before that. It was energy on that day in this fashion with these things. And this is another reason why we go, I want to do it like David did it, like Ezekiel did it, like Jeremiah did it, like Yeshua did it, like Moses did it. I want to do it on that day because I want to lend my energy with their, their guideline, that my predecessors, my ancestors, our collective ancestors model of how to properly observe these times. And so we, the more we've learned, the more we're just like, okay, all right, I'm going to do it. I don't care what nobody think. If y'all want to understand, ask me questions, but I ain't got to explain nothing to nobody. We're doing it this way. And we learn. There's still things we go, I thought I knew this. I thought I had a grasp on this for a few years, but I don't. So this is a fluid, ever-changing relationship, right? Where I'm learning, my wife actually doesn't like that when I do that. Got it. Okay. But she does like when I do this. Same thing. This is why I believe the marriage model of Yeshua and his bride is given to us, because the metaphor is exactly the same. The premise. That's why there's so much talk about adulterous generations and iniquity. And, I gave myself to you and you cheated on me, basically, Israel, This is why all the allegorical language of a marriage, because it's meant to model intimacy with our spiritual father.
That's good. Dude, I'm going to explain a lot to Melissa, but I hear the girls up and I hear your girl up. So I'll finish this off. This was a great interview.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm like, my brain's like going a million miles per second, but thank you for joining us. This is MLoveism TV. I'm your host, artist Daniel Quinones, and this is
Chris Crutchfield. Happy to be here, man. We'll talk to you soon.